What if the promised land was entered through fear, not applause? What if the first victory was really a test? And what if Joshua is less about easy triumph and more about the cost of obedience? Most people remember this book as walls falling and battles won. But when you slow down, the story feels heavier, almost unsettling. A generation shaped by wilderness now stands at the Jordan, carrying an old promise into a new crisis. The river crossing is not just a travel detail. It is a boundary moment between memory and responsibility, between what God said and what these people will actually do with that word. But here's the thing. The book of Joshua is not merely a conquest record. It is a spiritual diagnosis disguised as national history. Its core question is whether covenant people can receive a gift without corrupting it. Its answer unfolds through the Jordan crossing, the Fall of Jericho, the disturbing reality of holy war in Canaan, and finally the covenant renewal at Shechem, where the nation must choose who it will serve when the battles are no longer new. The crossing of the Jordan is framed as a public sign with priests' ark and memorial stones, so later generations would ask what happened there. Some historical details around route and exact seasonal conditions are debated, but the text's own emphasis is clear. This entry is meant to be remembered, retold, and morally interpreted. Then comes Jericho, where strategy gives way to ritual obedience. Marching, silence, trumpet blasts, and collapse form a pattern that sounds liturgical before it sounds military. Even here, the narrative warns that victory can be lost from within, not only from enemies outside. Then the darkest tension rises. Holy war language in Joshua has challenged readers for centuries. Scholars and theologians debate how to read the scope of destruction claims, including possible ancient warfare hyperbole, and how these passages relate to broader biblical ethics. We will not flatten that tension. We will face it. Because the text itself refuses sentimental religion, it forces us to ask what judgment means, what patience means, and what happens when people mistake divine command for personal rage. And after the campaigns, the book does something unexpected. It ends not in celebration, but in covenant confrontation at Shechem. Joshua gathers tribes, rehearses their history, rejects vague spirituality, and demands a clear allegiance. No dramatic soundtrack can soften that moment. Choose this day. Remember what shaped you. Refuse the idols that promise comfort and drain your soul. If you listen carefully, Joshua is not inviting spectators. It is summoning witnesses. Here's what most people miss. The greatest battle in this book may not be at Jericho at all, but in the human heart after the walls have already fallen. What does it mean to cross a river and never be the same again? Is the Jordan in Joshua only a miracle story, or is it a mirror placed in front of a nation that has finally received what it once only imagined? If the land is a gift, why does the narrative feel like a courtroom where motives are being tested? From the opening movements, Joshua refuses the language of easy success. It gives us memory, command, fear, and responsibility all at once. The people stand at the edge of the Jordan after years of wilderness formation, with Moses gone and Joshua now carrying leadership under divine instruction. The text frames this transition with deliberate continuity. The same God who spoke before now speaks again, and the promise to the ancestors is still active, but this does not erase accountability. The officers move through the camp. The people prepare provisions. The tribes east of the Jordan are reminded of prior obligations. This is administrative detail, yes, but also moral texture. Covenant faithfulness is not only emotional. It appears in promises kept when a person could easily withdraw. Then the ark becomes central. Priests carry it toward the water during harvest season when the Jordan is said to overflow its banks. The scene is narrated so that timing matters. Feet touch the edge, water is cut off, and a path opens. The imagery echoes an earlier deliverance without collapsing into nostalgia. Is this a repeated miracle or a warning against forgetting the source of identity? The narrative pushes both. 12 stones are taken from the riverbed, and 12 are set up so children can ask later what happened here. Memory is built into geography. Faith is not treated as private feeling but as public rehearsal. Notice the pressure inside the moment. They are entering land that holds fortified cities and established populations. They are carrying expectation that has survived generations, and they are being told to remember before they have secured anything. Why remember so early? Because the danger is already present. The danger is not only enemy resistance. The danger is the human tendency to consume blessing and erase dependence. The Jordan crossing is therefore both entrance and diagnosis. It asks whether the people will carry gratitude into conflict or turn quickly toward presumption. The text also includes rituals that modern listeners may find strange, especially the mass circumcision at Gilgal before major military action resumes. Strategically, it appears vulnerable. It is an insistence that identity precedes expansion. You do not seize promise while ignoring covenant signs. You receive promise within covenant terms. The naming of Gilgal, linked to a rolling away of disgrace from Egypt, adds a symbolic layer. History is being interpreted while it is still unfolding. Soon after, the commander of the Lord's army appears to Joshua near Jericho. Is this a theophany, an angelic figure, or literary theology expressed through vision language? Interpreters differ. Yet the line that matters lands with force when Joshua asks, "Are you for us or for our adversaries?" And the response is effectively neither. That is a shocking correction. God is not drafted into tribal certainty. The people are called to align with God, not the reverse. This single exchange cuts through triumphalism before trumpets ever sound. It also speaks to our central dilemma. Can covenant people receive divine promise without recasting God as a sponsor of their instincts? At this stage, the narrative has not glorified war. It has slowed us down through preparation, memorial, sign, and obedience. It has already hinted that internal posture will determine external outcomes. If this story were simply about conquest, why spend so much energy on memory stones and covenant markers? Because the writer knows what readers often resist. The land can be entered physically while being lost spiritually. A people can walk through parted waters and still drift. And that brings us to the city everyone remembers, Jericho. But what if Jericho is less about collapsing walls and more about collapsing illusions? Jericho rises in cultural memory like a cinematic icon, yet the text tells it in a rhythm that undermines military bravado. There is reconnaissance, yes, and Rahab's household enters the story through protection and confession. There is intelligence gathering, yes, but no siege engines dominate the frame. Instead, we get processions, silence, horns, and repeated circles. Why this pattern? Because Joshua is teaching that obedience can look weak before it looks wise. The people are asked to trust a liturgical strategy in front of a fortified threat. Rahab's role complicates every simplistic reading. She is a Canaanite woman on the margins who responds to what she has heard of Israel's God. Her confession names fear among the inhabitants and acknowledges divine sovereignty. The scarlet cord motif has generated symbolic readings across traditions, but at minimum, it marks mercy within judgment. In a chapter remembered for destruction, a household is preserved through allegiance and risk. The narrative, therefore, does not present indiscriminate flattening from the first line. It preserves moral contrast, even inside conflict. When the march around Jericho begins, silence becomes a theological instrument. Imagine the soundscape. Footsteps, ram's horns, then quiet. Day after day the city watches and perhaps mocks. Why command silence? One plausible reading is discipline of speech. No panic narratives, no self-congratulation, no competing strategy debates. The people are trained to move as one body under one word. In modern terms, obedience is being socialized at scale. On the seventh day, the pattern intensifies. 7 circuits, then shout, then collapse. Archaeological debates around Jericho's chronology remain contested, with different interpretations linked to dating methods and site layers. But within the canonical narrative, the focus is not engineering explanation. The focus is theological causality. The city falls when command is completed, not when Israel's technical superiority peaks. The reader is pushed toward an uncomfortable conclusion. Victory is not domesticated into technique. It remains relational and conditional. Then comes the herem language, often translated as ban or devoted destruction. This is where many listeners recoil, and rightly so. Terms of total devotion in ancient warfare texts can carry rhetorical hyperbole, according to some scholars. Yet that does not remove the ethical weight. The text itself places strict boundaries around plunder and possession. Precious metals go to the treasury. Personal enrichment is forbidden. This is not unrestricted violence for gain. It is framed as consecrated judgment under command. Still, the danger is immediate. If readers use this language to justify personal aggression, they have already betrayed the narrative's logic. The warning becomes concrete in Achan's breach. After Jericho, Israel faces Ai and unexpectedly fails. Why? Not because the enemy is superior in raw strength, but because covenant violation has occurred inside the camp. One man takes devoted items, hides them, and the community experiences collective consequence. Modern readers may question corporate accountability frameworks, and those questions matter. Yet the literary and theological point is unmistakable. Internal corruption can undo external momentum. This aligns directly with our thesis that the greatest threat is within the covenant body. At Ai, strategy later includes ambush and tactical adaptation, so Joshua is not anti-strategy. The book is anti-autonomy. Planning is not condemned, but planning severed from obedience is exposed. Even numbers reported for casualties and troop movement may involve ancient convention and should be handled cautiously. Still, the core contrast remains stable. Jericho teaches dependence. Achan teaches contamination. Ai teaches recalibration through confession and renewed command. There is also a subtle psychological arc. Initial miracle can produce awe, but awe can degrade into entitlement if not guarded. Jericho's spectacle may have tempted some toward the belief that success is now automatic. The narrative punctures that illusion almost immediately. Covenant life does not run on yesterday's miracle. It requires present fidelity. Can a community celebrate victory without idolizing victory itself? That question sits under every episode in Joshua. As the campaigns continue, alliances shift. The Gibeonite episode introduces deception, treaty-making, and consequences born from failing to inquire of the Lord. Leaders inspect appearances, make a covenant, then discover they were manipulated. The text does not portray them as villains for honoring the oath afterward. Rather, it displays the cost of discernment failure and the seriousness of sworn words. Even mistakes must now be carried truthfully. This is morally demanding leadership, not theatrical heroism. So when we remember Jericho, we should remember more than a wall. We should remember silence before shouting, mercy inside judgment, forbidden plunder, hidden theft, and the shock of defeat after triumph. That is not a conquest propaganda script. It is a spiritual anatomy lesson. But once we accept that, a harder question comes. How do we read the broader holy war material in Canaan without either sanitizing it or weaponizing it? The holy war passages in Joshua are among the most difficult in Scripture for contemporary audiences, including committed believers. Some readers want to skip them, others attempt quick solutions. Neither move is honest. The text presents conflict in which divine judgment language, land promise, and covenant identity intersect. These chapters demand careful distinctions between what the narrative describes, what it prescribes for that historical setting, and what later communities must never universalize. First, historical particularity matters. Joshua is situated in an ancient Near Eastern world, where warfare accounts often use totalizing formulas, phrases like "leaving none remaining," alongside later notices that various groups persisted in the land. This tension has led many scholars to suggest stock military rhetoric rather than mathematical extermination in every location. Even if that is partly true, the moral difficulty does not vanish. But it may clarify genre features and caution against literalistic overreach detached from context. Second, theological intent in Joshua is tied to judgment and covenant boundaries, not ethnic superiority as a timeless norm. The text itself includes outsiders who are incorporated through allegiance, Rahab being a primary example, and it later judges Israel with similar severity when Israel adopts the same corrupt practices. That reciprocal pattern matters. Judgment is not an ethnocentric privilege. It is a covenant principle that can turn inward rapidly. Third, the canon as a whole complicates any simplistic appropriation. Later prophets condemn violence, exploitation, and empty ritual among God's people. Wisdom literature wrestles with justice delays. The New Testament reframes warfare imagery towards spiritual struggle rather than territorial conquest. These trajectories are not a denial of Joshua, but a canonical expansion that blocks reckless imitation. We should therefore resist claims that Joshua authorizes modern political or personal aggression in God's name. Listeners may ask, if God is good, how can these texts exist at all? That question should not be shamed. It should be carried with reverence and intellectual honesty. Some theological models emphasize divine patience over long periods before judgment, citing narratives where Canaanite iniquity is said to mature over time. Others foreground human literary mediation and progressive revelation frameworks. Faithful interpreters disagree on mechanisms, but they agree that cruelty dressed as piety is a betrayal of Scripture's God. There is another danger, quieter but real. In reacting against difficult texts, we may remove judgment entirely from our theology, leaving only therapeutic spirituality. Joshua resists that move. It insists that evil has consequence, idolatry has social effects, and covenant betrayal is not trivial. Yet Joshua also resists the opposite error, sanctifying our anger. Divine judgment in the text is bounded by command, timing, and purpose beyond human ambition. Personal vengeance is never given the microphone. Consider the account of kings in the southern and northern campaigns. Coalitions form, battles occur, summaries speak of victories and territorial notes. Some geographical identifications and timeline harmonizations remain debated, but the repeated refrain is that Joshua followed what was commanded and that rest was partial, staged, and still incomplete. This undermines fantasies of instant utopia. Even under strong leadership, the people inherit responsibilities they must continue to steward. What about moral formation for today? We can say at least this much with caution. Joshua calls communities to distinguish obedience from aggression, zeal from hatred, and conviction from domination. It warns that sacred language can be misused by undisciplined hearts. It asks whether we can confront evil without becoming what we condemn. That is not an ancient question only, it is painfully current, and maybe that is why the narrative keeps returning to memory, command, and choice. Military episodes are never left as isolated spectacle. They are folded back into covenant reflection. The book seems determined to prevent readers from reducing God to a mascot for victory. Here's what most people miss. Joshua's hardest battlefield may be interpretive before it is historical. How we read it can either humble us or arm our arrogance. As the campaigns close, the noise of battle fades. You might expect a triumphant ending, banners and applause. Instead, we move toward land allotments, boundaries, unresolved pockets, cities of refuge, altar disputes, and then one final assembly where words cut deeper than swords. Why does the book spend so much time on allotments? Because promise must become practice. Tribal territories are named with concrete detail: valleys, towns, borders, and inherited lines. Some place names and mapping correspondences are debated in modern scholarship, but the narrative intent is unmistakable. Covenant life is lived in ordinary space, not only in miraculous episodes. Faithfulness has cadastral coordinates. It has neighbors, fields, disputes, and legal structures. The cities of refuge are especially revealing. In a book known for war, these cities institutionalize protection for manslayers pending due process. That legal mercy introduces restraint into a violent world. Justice is not mob retaliation. Procedure matters. Testimony matters. Life cannot be taken by raw impulse. This feature complicates claims that Joshua celebrates violence as a virtue. Instead, it embeds limits and distinctions, even while acknowledging harsh realities. Then comes the altar crisis near the Jordan. Transjordan tribes build a large altar, and Western tribes fear apostasy, almost launching war against their own kin. Before bloodshed, a delegation investigates. Dialogue exposes intention. The altar is not rival worship, but witness marker. Conflict is de-escalated through inquiry. How different would communities be if suspicion paused long enough for conversation? Here again, the enemy almost emerges from within through misinterpretation. All of this leads toward Shechem, where Joshua gathers tribes, elders, heads, judges, and officers. He recounts the story from Abraham onward, calling memory into present decision. The rhetoric is covenant lawsuit and pastoral plea at once. Put away foreign gods, choose whom you will serve. As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. These lines are famous, but in context they are not decorative wall art. They are an ultimatum after evidence. Notice Joshua's realism. He does not flatter the assembly. He even says they are not able to serve the Lord in a casual, superficial manner because God is holy and jealous in covenant terms. Some read this as rhetorical provocation to expose overconfidence. Others read it as warning against performative commitment. Either way, Joshua pushes beyond emotional assent to durable allegiance. The people answer with confidence. Joshua then sets terms, records words, and raises a great stone as witness. Again, memory is materialized. Stones at Jordan, stones at Shechem. Memory is externalized, so future forgetting will have friction. This is profoundly relevant for any generation that confuses intensity of moment with longevity of obedience. The book knows that public declarations decay unless anchored in practices. And then, almost quietly, Joshua dies. Burial notes follow. Joseph's bones are buried. Eleazar dies. The ending is sober, not cinematic. Why end this way? Because covenant history outlives charismatic leaders. The unresolved question returns to the community after the hero exits. Will they keep covenant when no one is left who crossed the Jordan? The next biblical book suggests the answer will be painful. So where does this leave our main dilemma? Joshua does include remarkable victories and dramatic intervention, but it frames them as components of a larger test. Can a people inhabit gift without idolatry? Can they confront evil without baptizing their ego? Can they remember mercy while handling judgment? Can they choose covenant after crisis passes? These are not peripheral themes, they are the spine. For viewers today, one pastoral line must be said plainly. Spiritual success can become spiritual danger if gratitude fades and self-trust rises. The wall that falls outside you is less decisive than the idol that remains inside you. Pray for courage, yes, but also for clean motives. Ask not only to win, but to remain faithful when winning becomes possible. If Joshua unsettles you, that may be part of its gift. A text that refuses sentimental religion can still drive us toward humility. We do not need to pretend every problem is solved. We do need to read with honesty, reverence, and caution. Some historical details remain debated. Some ethical tensions remain sharp. Yet the narrative's warning is clear enough to act on now. Victory without covenant integrity becomes defeat in sacred clothing. And that brings us to the threshold of the final reflection. If Shechem is the true climax, then the final question is no longer about ancient walls or distant kings. It is about present allegiance when no trumpet is sounding. When the battle headlines fade, whom will you serve, and what quiet idols still ask for your trust? So what have we actually seen in Joshua when the dust settles? Not a simple anthem of conquest, and not a story that can be reduced to ancient spectacle. We have seen a covenant people crossing the Jordan with memorial stones, taking Jericho through strange obedience, wrestling with the moral weight of holy war language in Canaan, and standing at Shechem under a final demand to choose whom they will serve. The pattern is consistent. External events are real, but internal allegiance is decisive. The first takeaway is this: gift does not cancel responsibility. The Jordan crossing is not merely a miracle report. It is a public memory mechanism built so future generations must ask what happened and why it mattered. Promise is received, but it is also interpreted. The text keeps reminding us that a people can inherit land while drifting in heart. If that feels uncomfortably relevant, it is because Joshua was never designed for spectators. Second takeaway: obedience in Joshua is not triumphal swagger. Jericho is narrated with silence, ritual movement, and strict limits, while Achan's hidden disobedience shows how quickly victory can rot from within. The real danger is not only what stands outside the walls, it is what is concealed inside the camp. That is the thesis thread running through every major scene, and it is why Joshua still confronts modern spiritual ambition. Third takeaway: the holy war tension must be faced with humility, not slogans. Some destruction formulas may reflect ancient warfare rhetoric conventions, and chronology or scope debates remain active. But uncertainty in details does not erase moral gravity. Joshua does not grant us permission to baptize rage, ethnic pride, or modern aggression. It forces a harder discipline, to confess that judgment belongs to God, that covenant demands restraint, and that sacred language can be misused by unclean motives. Then the book ends where all the noise quiets, at Shechem, with no room for vague spirituality. Choose this day, not in the adrenaline of battle, but in the plain light of continuity, memory, and daily allegiance. Joshua's final movement suggests that the deepest conflicts begin after visible victories, when routines return and idols look reasonable again. If we answer our main question honestly, Joshua presents both triumph and test, but the test governs the meaning of triumph. The entry into the land is not proof that corruption is impossible. It is the moment corruption becomes newly possible, if gratitude fades and obedience becomes selective. That is why the narrative keeps turning inward. The land was never the final prize. Covenant faithfulness was. Hold this close for a moment. Many people ask for breakthrough. Fewer ask for integrity after breakthrough. Many pray for open doors. Fewer pray for clean hands once the door opens. Joshua warns that spiritual defeat can wear the costume of success, and yet it also offers a sober hope. People can remember, repent, and renew covenant before ruin becomes final. If this journey sharpened something in you, stay for the next episode, because one question still waits in the dark. After Joshua's generation is gone, what happens when a people keep the land but forget the Lord who gave it? Based on what we uncovered in today's episode, answer this in the comments. Do you think Joshua's main battle was in Canaan or inside God's people? And as always, God bless you.